Hello, science enthusiasts. Welcome to Science Chat in part of our Spaces Unleashed program. Every week, we bring you an amazing expert to talk their area of knowledge. Today, we are thrilled to bring you Dr. Reshmina William, who's a hydrologist, and she's going to talk to us about, well, water and water policy. Welcome. How's it going tonight, Doc?
It's going absolutely great. It's actually 9 p.m. on my end, so my dog is fast asleep on the couch right now.
Your dog's a little tired right now because you're on the East Coast, I believe.
Yes, that is correct. I'm in Washington, D.C., our nation's beautiful capital.
Now, before we get going, I do background on all of the guests. And by background, I mean I creep your social media profiles. And, okay, you have to tell me about, you got to meet Hugh Jackman, like Wolverine?
I got to sing on stage. With Hugh Jackman. It was living the dream, let me tell you. Yeah. So I am a scientist, obviously, first and foremost, but I also have this deep love of music.
Yeah.
I've been playing the piano and singing basically since I was 5, and I've had the chance to just sing with some absolutely amazing choruses. When I was living in Chicago about 2 years ago, performing arts, shout out to my friends in Chicago, y'all. And we were selected to be one of the choruses and join Hugh Jackman on stage during his global tour. So yeah, that's my choir.
Okay, so did you get to, like, you got to sing with him? One thing that people is shocking is like he's Wolverine, but he's also an amazing showman, like a singer and dancer and stuff. Did you get to meet him or just pose with a picture with him?
We got to meet him. He was incredibly sweet. It was actually National Coming Out Day. So he had us up on the stage after our performance and actually was going around and talking to everyone and just said it was an absolute delight to sing with us on such a special occasion. So he's a really sweet person.
Okay, well, I'm glad I did background on you to see this picture. Everybody looks really happy in it. It's in the nest for folks who are wondering what I'm talking about. Okay, so back to you. Doc, could you tell us a little bit about your education, just so people get an idea about what your training in science is?
Sure. So let me backtrack a little bit say where I'm coming from with the science of water. I actually started becoming interested in this topic because my hometown was hit by a cyclone during my 10th year of high school. I grew up in the Middle East, and obviously we don't get a lot of rain. And so getting hit by a cyclone was just absolutely devastating for my region of the world. People had their houses destroyed. Many people lost their lives. And so when I came to the University of Illinois for college, I was already starting to try and find somewhere where I could connect my love of STEM with my desire to do, like, as cliche as it sounds, to do good in the world, because I never really put together, hey, I could do math and I could do like chemistry and physics. Maybe I could use that to help people. I joined an organization called Engineers Without Borders. We do work very similar to Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, in that we go and do engineering projects all over the world to do with bringing energy and water and partnering with communities to bring amenities that we take for granted here in the United States and in Canada to the rest of the world. So I had the great fortune of working with a community in northwestern Cameroon on a water distribution project. And that was kind of my aha moment, where I saw that water was that connector I was looking for between my love of science and mathematics and people, like getting to actually work with and talk to people. And so I did my PhD at the University of Illinois in civil engineering with a focus on water resources and environmental engineering, and specifically on the study of water in our cities, how it moves in terms of the rain that hits the ground and moves through our cities, but also in terms of the way that water interacts with people in the built environment through our drinking water supplies and through our waste management systems.
Water is so critical. I think a lot of us who live in North America take for granted just, you turn on the tap and there's water, right? And then we see water as a nuisance or potentially damaging when there's flooding. Western Canada, I don't know if you saw the pictures in the United States, but BC, the lower mainland of BC around Vancouver, it flooded like horrifically a while back. That's where Chris, my co-host, grew up.
Mhm.
And like all of this, it seems the aha moment was you could help people by understanding the math, the science, the physics of water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's so wonderful. And that was like, so what was the before that? What were you always interested in science before you went on this trip to, was it Cameroon? Did you say?
Yeah, Cameroon,
Yeah.
northwestern Cameroon.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I
No.
actually
Oh, okay.
really wanted to. I mean, I mentioned a little bit that music was my second love after science.
Yeah.
And I, for the longest time, wanted to go into performing arts and piano performing arts specifically.
Oh.
I wanted to compose and write for to sing and to perform at the piano. But my parents very lovingly sat me down and had the quote unquote conversation where they were like, you're talented, but maybe give this engineering thing a try before you decide if you don't want to do it and you want to do performing arts for a living. I'm very glad that they did give me that advice and that I did give it a good fair shake because I can honestly not imagine doing anything else. Obviously, I get to do my hobby on the side and it's still a lot of fun. But I still get to connect it back to the science and the engineering that I love. I'm actually putting together a virtual concert with a group of my other science fellows, highlighting climate change and the cycle of drought and flood in the natural world. So I get to meld both of my passions.
That's awesome. That's so good. I mean, I think if you had left that alone, part of you would feel unfulfilled, I think, right? Like you'd need that creativity in your life. A lot of scientists that I speak to are super creative, and you kind of need that brain to solve problems anyways. Could you talk to us a little bit about your the green solutions that you did during your studies?
Sure. So like I mentioned, one of the things I've been interested in for a very long time is flooding, especially flooding in urban environments, in our cities and in our towns. And I don't know if you know a lot about the Midwest and like older cities in the United States in particular, but we have a huge issue with basement backups in my old neck of the woods. And that's partly because we have such old systems that our sewage and our stormwater go into the same set of pipes. And so what happens is whenever we get the smallest amount of rain, everything would just overflow. And if you didn't have a good working sump pump in your basement, you would just end up with literally sewage in your basement.
The sump pump is down, the sump pump's down in a hole and it clicks on and pumps the liquid constantly out of your basement.
Exactly. Okay. And if that fails for whatever reason, you just get a backup of raw sewage into your basement, which is obviously an annoyance and gross, but also like a health risk.
Yeah.
And it specifically impacts disproportionately parts of the city that are older and haven't had their pipes maintained in a long period of time. And that typically, at least in America, often means that those are communities of color, low-income communities, people who can't afford to keep those pipe networks as regularly maintained, and so end up with a whole plethora of issues because of that. And so you can deal with it one of two ways. You can do the way that people have historically dealt with this issue of all of this extra stormwater with nowhere to go, which is put it in a pipe and send it away as quickly as possible. That's what we've always done. And in fact, Chicago has done that and is in the process of doing that. One fun fact about the work I was doing was I actually got to work on a series of pipes under the city of Chicago called the Chicago Tunnel and Reservoir Project, or TARP. And these are enormous tunnels. You could literally drive a lorry through them. They're 30 feet in diameter, and they're designed, they're enormous.
They're under the seat? They're under the city?
They're under the city of Chicago. They had to rip out large portions of the street to put these in. But they're designed to hold all that extra water until it can be pumped away and treated safely and then returned to the river, because otherwise you just have raw sewage going into the Chicago River, and it's already plenty polluted, believe me. So that was one alternative. Obviously, it's very disruptive to people's lives, having to rip up all of that existing infrastructure, put in these big pipes. It costs a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And so we have started as an engineering community moving towards what we call green infrastructure solutions. So if you imagine cities as this hard paved surface, the water just hits and the rainfall hits and it runs off the ground. It has nowhere else to go except into the pipes. What if you could send that city back to the way it was before we paved it over? What if you could put these little sponges in to soak up the water, the rainwater, before it manages to get to the pipes? That's what green infrastructure is designed to do. Mm-hmm. It's these small dispersed solutions. So things like bioswales, bioretention cells, rain gardens that use native vegetation and native soils to absorb that water before it can become a challenge for the community. And
so it's like strategically putting sponges around your city, like giant biological sponges. Oh, okay.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And obviously it performs that function excellently. That's what soils are designed to do naturally, but it also has lots of different co-benefits. If you think about it, obviously our pets love green space. So yep. You have lots of space to walk your dog, and all this beautiful nature. It's good for our mental health as well. And it provides biodiversity for a whole host of other critters, urban nature, and wildlife. So Chicago has a whole suite of migratory warblers and other birds that come through the city because we have so many parks as part of our built space. And so you're encouraging all of those co-benefits as well. And this is something that we can be part of as well, not just by petitioning our local governments to, take part and put in more of these green spaces, but this works best as a solution if it's done as a public-private partnership. So people in their own backyards can install a rain garden or install a rain barrel or disconnect their downspout from their roof, and make a very small change at the local level that if we all contribute can make a big difference for our cities as a whole.
Don't these like spongy green spaces with trees, don't they increase your property value as well? Because I read that somewhere that the more green space there is, the more the property's worth because it just looks nicer.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's all about changing that mindset that the manicured lawn is the best way for a house to improve its value, and moving towards more natural landscapes. I like to call them little oases in the sea of green desert because urban lawns are honestly absolutely awful for the environment. Especially if you think about it in somewhere like Arizona, where you have to spend all of that extra water and fertilizer getting your grass to look green only to trim it 3 times a year. It's not great. So that's my personal pitch.
Gotcha. I talked to, on the podcast, Michael Norton is a forestry expert in Canada. And he had mentioned, mental health with these green spaces. And then they looked at studies about having a tree, just looking at a tree can boost your mental health. I mean, there's not just alone that you can help with flooding and dealing with all this water, but just also the mental health of these spaces is huge. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing, I talked about the inequity that we have in some of our cities, at least in the Midwest that I know of, with regards to the flooding challenges. We also have the same issues with our access to green space in those same areas. So you could really, if you do this well and avoid things like gentrification, obviously, because the housing values will go up as soon as you start putting in green space, like you mentioned. But if you can do that, you can actually improve access to green space for all these communities that didn't have access to it before. So it can be a really wonderful thing for those neighborhoods.
One other thing I was thinking about, and this is kind of silly, but if there are tunnels under Chicago big enough to drive cars through, then obviously it's quite plausible that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles could survive in tunnels under New York City.
It is quite possible. And actually, I think New York has its own set of tunnels. It's not called the TARC Project. I don't know what acronym. No, it's a different city, I know. Yeah, I don't know what acronym they've slapped it with, but I know that they have similar tunnels under their city. So yeah, maybe there is a colony of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles living underneath New York.
If you're just joining us tonight, I have water engineer, hydrologist, Dr. Reshmina William with me tonight. Hopefully I said your first name right.
You did.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. Just double checking my notes. And we're talking about green initiatives to help with flooding around cities. Is there anything else you'd like to chat about with that, or do you want to move on with where you are now with AAAS?
Yeah, let's move on a little bit, because I can move on to the more like policy side of what I do.
Yeah, let's go there. Yeah.
So AAAS, or the American Association for the Advancement of Science, is one of the largest science communication nonprofits. I want to say definitely in the country, but probably also in the world. We're actually an international network. And their flagship program is the Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, where they take folks like me who have STEM advanced degrees and partner them with folks in the federal government. So that's in the United States, we have three branches of government. So we have the executive branch, which are things like the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Transportation, things like that. So we send fellows there. We send people to the congressional branch, where they help to actually write legislation or help the folks who hire them write legislation that will actually go before the Congress and get voted on and hopefully turned into law at some point. And then there's me. I am the lonely judicial fellow. So my job in this program is to work with the Federal Judicial Center, which is kind of the research and education arm of the federal judiciary, and educate judges on the science of water and the environment more broadly.
So they send you, the science folks, out to, I guess, like be a resource for everybody who's not a scientist in all of the different areas of government?
That's exactly right. So really, all of these branches want to hire science people. They just sometimes don't have the budget for it or the knowledge of how to go about hiring those people. And so the AAAS STPF Fellowship acts as a gateway. Essentially, they provide some of the resources and the funds and match people with the agencies and the different branches of governments, depending on their interests and their specializations.
So with the judiciary, how do you?
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
It's hard to say.
I'm sorry. I'm not great at pronouncing things as they are. Chris makes fun of me all the time. But what do you like? What do you educate judges on? I have no idea. Could you talk a little bit about that? I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what question to ask.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you think about it, judges aren't scientists, but they deal with a lot of science in a lot of their cases. So for example, let's say that you're a judge and you're trying to deal with a hypothetical wastewater injection well in Hawaii that's pretty close to a beach, and you know that the beach is getting contaminated, but you're not sure how the groundwater seeping into the ocean gets there. That's a science question. It's not a legal question. That's actually a real case that went before the United States Supreme Court, by the way. And it's a case that I'm helping judges interpret the science of as that court case trickles down through the lower courts. Because in the United States, when the Supreme Court rules on something, it sets what we call precedent for all of the lower courts. So they have to follow the orders of the highest court, essentially. But the way that the Supreme Court ruled left a lot of murkiness in the decision from a legal standpoint that required a lot of scientific fact-finding on the part of judges. So I'm helping to create videos and resources and education materials to help them more fairly adjudicate cases like that come before their courts.
Can you talk about this thing in Hawaii, or is it kind of, like you said, it was quote unquote hypothetical, or is that a little on the nose of something we can't talk about?
It is literally a case that very recently happened, and it's public information, so I can totally talk about it. So this was a case that happened in Maui. Basically, what happened was the county of Maui had historically, because if you think about it, Hawaii is an island. There's nowhere for your wastewater to go except down, right?
Yeah.
And so what the county of Maui was doing was partially treating their wastewater and then discharging it through these injection wells into groundwater. Now, because Hawaii is volcanic, there's lots of little pores all over the island for that groundwater to seep and eventually make its way to the Pacific Ocean. Water always wants to go downhill.
Right.
And the sea is the most downhill place that you can get from a water perspective.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so it eventually ended up in the Pacific Ocean, which is regulated under U.S. environmental law by something called the Clean Water Act. And so a whole bunch of different NGOs affiliated with the wildlife in the area, and especially on Hawaii's beaches, sued the county and said, you can't do this. And the county shot back and said, sure, we can. Groundwater isn't regulated under the Clean Water Act. And so obviously this caused, and it isn't, groundwater isn't regulated under federal law at all in the United States, which is absolutely mind-blowing.
That's
to
a
me,
little bananas.
That's where we are right now. And so they did actually have a valid point. And that's the reason why it got escalated to the Supreme Court eventually. And what the Supreme Court said was, it's a little of column A, a little of column B. We don't want to give too much jurisdiction to the Environmental Protection Agency under the Clean Water Act, but we also can't say that if you like put a pipe underground like 3 feet from the ocean and it somehow magically appears in the ocean that you've not violated the Clean Water Act because your pipe was underground 3 feet away from the ocean. And so they kind of split the difference between those two rulings and said that if the groundwater acts as a transport so that it's functionally equivalent to you dumping that water in the water of the United States, it counts as a dumping of a dumping of pollutant to the water of the United States. Sorry, long convoluted explanation, but there's a lot of weird backstory to this case. But that's kind of where I came in.
Got you.
At this point.
Now, can you I have a question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but most coastal cities, they treat their water and then they shoot it out to the ocean, or their sewage.
That's correct.
Their sewage may go straight out to the ocean without very little treatment.
That is correct. And so really what this case was about getting a permit for those discharges so that EPA could monitor it over time, right?
Oh, and they were like,
so
we
they
don't
were
need to do
discharging
that.
without a permit, exactly, because they were pumping it into these subsurface injection wells first.
I mean, it is Hawaii.
So,
they could just pump it into a volcano, I guess, and then that solves that problem.
I have never heard that as a wastewater solution. I'm a little curious what would happen if you did that.
Well, everything else that goes into a volcano, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just teasing. I don't live on Hawaii. I guess that would be a bad idea. It probably wouldn't smell great. And then those are, of course, tourist attractions.
No. I imagine that you would actually probably melt your pipes as well before they got
I forgot it. I forgot it's so hot. Okay.
Yeah.
This is why you're in charge of this and helping, not me. So with AAAS, is that how AAAS?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Perfect. I find this fascinating that they send they send experts like all over the place to help out the politicians and legal people and folks that got elected that, are lawyers and have no idea. Most judges are lawyers, obviously, not necessarily have any training in science. Do you find you butt heads with people a few times because their way of thinking is so alien to a scientific way of thinking? Or is that a tough question to answer?
I wouldn't say butt heads necessarily. It's more that you're trying to reconcile two very logical groups of people, but they're logical in two very different ways. Lawyers, I mean, I love law. It's the reason I took this position. But the way that they define logic in some ways is very similar to scientists, but they're working off a different set of principles. And so the way that they come to conclusions is sometimes very different from the conclusions that we reach as scientists. And so it's learning to use that same logical framework to say, yes, this issue is important. You should pay attention to it. And here's why.
That is so interesting. I wonder if Canada has that. I have no idea.
I'm sure that you do. I could do a little bit of research and tweet at you if I find anything.
Sure, I'd be super curious about my own country if we have something like AAAS. Maybe. I have no idea. So my other question for you is, like, you're an engineer and you have a PhD and you work with the public and the government and like the judicial branch. Is there something important in your field that you'd like people to know about? I mean, I kind of hijacked our conversation talking about this case in Hawaii. It's fascinating, but
well, it actually is a good segue because it brings up the bigger point I've been trying to hammer home in the last 6 months I've been on this fellowship, which is that water is connected. And historically, we've like chopped up the way that it interacts with our world into so many little segments, like little artificial divides between groundwater and surface water and ocean water and drinking water and like non-potable water and storm water. And really what the study of water has showed us over the last like half a century of us studying this in depth is that everything is connected. Our actions always affect the folks that are further, quote unquote, down the river from us, even if we don't understand how or why. And so instead of breaking up our world into these little bite-sized chunks, I encourage everyone, not just hydrologists, but everyone to really think about big picture systems. So how does the way that you use this resource, water, energy, whatever, impact the people and the place around you? So that's my key takeaway for anyone who's listening to this. Think about big systems thinking, not your little tiny piece of the pie.
It's really tough for the average person to wrap their head around, isn't it? Because you could leave where I live, I could leave my tap running. I could leave a garden hose on by accident for weeks and it would, like I could do that because our water, like we're in Canada, we have so much fresh water for our tiny population in Canada. Whereas other places in the world, it's completely the opposite. So it's good to,
absolutely.
It's good to think about this.
And I'm not saying that regional differences don't matter. Of course they do. That's why we have regional governments and like people who are actually trying to make a difference on a small scale. But it is also good to think about it in the big picture sometimes.
Is there anything that you've looked at in the last little while that surprised you about that relationship? Like, since you mentioned everything's kind of connected, is there some examples you could give us?
So the biggest example from the judicial branch is obviously that groundwater case that I just gave you, that like that artificial divide between groundwater and surface water just doesn't exist. It's just a question of when it's going to reach your river or stream or ocean, not if it's going to reach there. Things that were surprising to me, I don't think that I realized this until I started digging in a little bit further, how many of these topics intersected with each other, especially when it comes to issues of equity. So one particular topic that's very near and dear to my heart is the issue of nitrates in drinking water.
Oh, yeah.
So nitrates are a commonly used farm fertilizer all over the world, but especially in the United States, and especially in the Midwest and in California. And for those of you who are listening who may not be aware, it dissolves very readily into water. It's one of the reasons why we use it in the first place. But it does mean that if you don't apply it properly, it does get washed into rivers, streams, which cause all sorts of problems on their own, don't get me wrong, but also into drinking water supplies, like groundwater supplies, which again, don't fall under, in the United States, under the Clean Water Act. And depending on the size of the well and how many people it's like going to, may not be covered under the Safe Drinking Water Act, which regulates our drinking water either. And so you have so many low-income communities of like migrant farm laborers in California, for example, who are drinking nitrate-contaminated water, which is incredibly bad, especially for younger infants, because it basically replaces hemoglobin in the human body. And so it basically eliminates your ability to, or your blood's ability to absorb oxygen. So in babies, it leads to something called blue baby syndrome, which can be incredibly dangerous.
Okay, that's not good. That's horrific.
No.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Nitrates are bad.
The irony, Doc, is like I teach high school chemistry, and literally like 3 weeks ago, we went over ionic solubility, right? And that's the rule I tell them is like any metal that's connected to nitrate, you don't have to look on the solubility table. It's going to be aqueous, which means that the thing will dissolve in water. And that's a bit ironic. We're talking now about those nitrates, and to get them, and then to get them out of wastewater is incredibly difficult because they are so soluble. Like it's not easy.
Yeah. So speaking of court cases, there was a huge fight in Iowa over this. So Iowa obviously is a huge farming belt community state in the United States, but we also have some large cities. So we have Des Moines, which is a fairly large city that takes its water from a major river in Iowa that has a lot of farm fields upstream of it. You could kind of tell where this is going.
Oh, yep.
They found out that their drinking water was so contaminated with nitrates that they'd have to spend $150 million to upgrade their drinking water system to just get their drinking water nitrate levels down to a normal, reasonable, healthy amount to send out to the general public in the city. And so they tried to sue the farming districts upstream. It didn't end up going anywhere in court for various legal reasons that I won't get into on this podcast, but it was a very interesting discussion. And it really brought home the fact that, yes, all these systems are connected and we really should be thinking about them as a whole and not as these individual chunks.
That is an important point, that it's all connected. Plus, for folks who love dogs, those, excess nitrates can lead to algal blooms, and then boof, you've got that dangerous blue-green algae stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's
absolutely.
It's connected to our pets a bit. Doc, that kind of brings me to my last question. And just to kind of do a room reset, if you're just joining us for Science Chat, hello, everybody. The Science Podcast will always be free to download and listen to. You'll never have to worry about paying for it. But we have some amazing ways that you can help us out with running the show. The first one is to think about becoming a patron on Patreon. And we call our patrons now the Paw Pack. There's a whole bunch of awesome perks and different tiers of support. We also have a very detailed and excellent merch store. And if you're listening to this in time, we have pre-orders of the Bunsen 2.0 stuffy that was just adorable. You can check it out. There's also the Beaker stuffy on our store and a whole bunch of comfy clothes. The third thing you can do is give us a good rating. Rate the podcast wherever you're listening to this. We'd love to get a great rating from you. Okay, back to the show. I have the amazing Dr. Williams with us tonight, who's talking to us about water and water policy. And we're going to open up the floor to questions right away. My last question for you, Doc, is about pets. It's this, Bunsen and Beaker's account is a science communication account through the eyes of dogs. And I'd love to hear you talk about your pets, or if you have a pet story from your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So as some of you might have seen in the pre-show reel, the tweet that went out, I have one sleepy old brown dog called Max. He's a 13-year-old beagle mix. We're not sure what the mix side of the equation is because we adopted him when he was 9. So we have no idea where he comes from, but he's just the absolute sweetest dog, and we are so blessed to have him in our lives. One really cute thing that he does is he's claimed our couch as his own personal dog bed. And so if you're trying to take a nap on the couch, he will very carefully creep up on you and kind of gauge the distance and then take a flying leap and land on your stomach and then army crawl until his nose is literally in your face and then go to sleep on your chest.
Oh, and I love that.
He's 55 pounds. And, I mean, it's so sweet. And I don't want to move him because he is 13. He's an old mad dog, but he is quite heavy.
Aww. That is so cute. It is one of my favoriteest things in the whole wide world when a dog falls asleep on you. Like, it is just something that, if you've never experienced a dog falling asleep on you, it is like the most special thing ever because they're just so hot and warm. I mean, it gets uncomfortable real quick because they are. It's like having a nap with a hot water bottle, but it is.
It really is.
But oh my goodness, it just is so sweet. That is a great story. Thanks for sharing. What's the beagle's name again?
Max.
Max, right? I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was trying to find a picture of Max in your profile, and I must have went too quickly, but it is in the ad for this. It is. Oh, there's Max. It's your pinned tweet.
Mm-hmm.
That's your first tweet. There we go. So I will throw that into the nest. Okay, there. You can see Max in the nest there. All right, we're going to open up the floor to questions for our expert. If you have questions about, I think, water. We're probably good to have our expert. And is that Bunsen, Chris?
Yes, it is.
It's a grumbly Bernese Mountain Dog in the background there. If you have questions,
I opened the door. I opened the door because you guys were talking about dogs, and I opened it, and Bunsen was right by the door, and Beaker was in her crate, and they just looked at me, and then they came in here, and now this is what I have.
You have the two dogs.
I have the two dogs. Beaker is laying down, and Bunsen is saying, "Where's my Pavlovian treat?"
This is toddler time.
Yeah. So our speakers we have Tracy and then Kathy.
Awesome. Go ahead, Tracy.
Hi. So since you said you met Hugh Jackman, this is just going to be a non-science thing, but you were talking about it. So would you say that he is the greatest showman?
I would say anyone who can play both Wolverine and Gaston equally well is probably the greatest showman, yes.
Great question.
Yeah, because I was thinking about the movie.
Oh,
so
yeah, absolutely.
I was trying to make a joke there.
we did actually get to sing a couple of pieces from that on stage, so that was fun.
Yeah, that has a special place in my heart. So that's really cool that you got to meet him.
I'm glad. Thank you.
And the science is also awesome too. It's like, always going to be above my head, but it's very cool to hear about.
Right. Thank you.
I forgot that Hugh Jackman played Gaston.
Yes, I'd forgotten about that as well, right up until the point where he was up on stage dancing in a pair of suspenders and briefs with the rest of the Beauty and the Beast cast. That was fun.
One aside, Doc, you might find this funny. When we went to Disney World, there's like Gaston, the characters that people dress up as. There was a Gaston guy who was heavily muscled, like he was like built like Gaston. And I went up and I was just needling him about some questions. I was like, how many eggs do you eat a day? And he's like, oh my goodness, this again. I ate 12 dozen eggs again. And he just recited word for word like it is the question people had asked him. And then I said, aren't you worried about getting salmonella or something from all those eggs? He's like, salmonella? What's that? Does that come from the river?
Oh, no.
So he was just super clever, this guy, right? So anyways, Gaston jokes. Over to Kathy, I think, okay?
Hi, Dr. William. First of all three of my degrees are from the University of Illinois. Go Illini.
Go Illini.
And I have a couple questions for you. The first one is, I have an adult grandson who lives in Des Moines. Did they fix the water system there?
Yes, they did. They'd already fixed it because, obviously human health comes above all else, but they were trying to sue to get back some of that money, essentially, because $150 million is a lot of money to cough up. So they were hoping to get some of that back.
Yeah, and I guess I still have hope for Flint, Michigan, then maybe eventually.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering, is there anything in your field or your experience that you see as really hopeful for improving water quality overall?
I would say the biggest hope that I have is the strides that we've made in, honestly, the last 50 years. So the early 70s were kind of the advent of the big environmental laws in the United States. So your Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act came a little bit later. That was like mid 70s. But since then, we have made so much progress. The Potomac is almost fishable and swimmable again. And honestly, for anyone who knows Washington, D.C. and its rivers, that fact is honestly by itself reason for hope, because it was honestly so badly polluted before that was like a pipe dream for many people. I'm working on a Sierra Club project right now where we're putting back to petition that the river should be designated fishable, swimmable in the next 3 years. And the fact that we've gotten to this point is really, really quite hopeful. I also see a lot of hope in the fact that the Biden administration and government more generally is really taking environmental justice seriously. The fact that they realize, yeah, we've made all these great strides in the last 5 decades, but those strides haven't been the same degree for all people, and that they're actively trying to address those concerns. That gives me a lot of hope as well.
That's fantastic. And yeah, this is a little bit older example, but Lake Erie and the Great Lakes used to be just awful.
Mm-hmm.
And they really cleaned up Lake Erie. Lake Erie doesn't
absolutely.
burn anymore.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Fascinating. I love the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I kind of feel it's a bit on the nose that Lake Erie was the lake that was kind of sketchy to swim in. I always felt that way.
Well, a lot of the lakes were like that. Lake Michigan. So, sorry, I know that you want to take questions, but this is always a fun little.
No, go ahead. I was being silly. But go.
Chicago literally rerouted the Illinois River and the Chicago River because they didn't want to have essentially an open sewer flowing into Lake Michigan anymore because it was their source of drinking water. So they literally turned the entire river around and made it flow south away from Lake Michigan in the early 19th century.
Holy crow. I have an ignorant question as a Canadian. What is this river, the Potomac River you're talking about? What's that?
Yeah, the Potomac River runs through the middle of Washington, D.C.
Okay, all right.
It's the river right before it hits the bay.
Okay, and it was heavily polluted at one time. That's what you're
Yes, a lot of the major rivers that flow through American cities were absolutely awful. The Chicago River and the Potomac are the ones I know the most about because I've lived in those areas, but all of them have taken a beating.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry if that was a silly joke, but I live in Western Canada, and I don't remember studying that in high school. So, who's our next speaker, Chris? Liz? Maybe Chris is dealing with grouchy Bunsen. I think it's Liz.
It's me. Well, I'm glad you just mentioned that. So, hi, Dr. William. I'm actually about 25, 30 miles south of you down in Prince William County. So I grew up here and I know the Potomac well, and holy crap, was that thing scary for a really long time. If you fall in it, you may end up with superpowers when you get out. And then they found those snake-like fish. But anyway, I digress. Sorry. So being down here in Prince William, we have a part that we call the rural crescent, where we're trying to not get a lot of, growth because we want to preserve nature. I know, crazy idea. And our Board of County Supervisors is really pushing to throw out a lot of data centers. And the environmentalist groups are all talking about the impacts to the Occoquan watershed, which goes through the Potomac. And I have a well. And so one of the concerns we're having is if they put these data centers in, are these wells going to dry up? Am I not going to have water in my house? How is it going to impact the environment? So I didn't know if you could kind of opine or lead me in a direction where I can maybe make some arguments when I go speak at the county meeting about, for the love of God, we need green things and water.
I'm glad you asked that question. So data centers use extraordinary amounts of water, and they have a very large carbon footprint just because you have such high energy requirements associated with running all those computers and cooling all of that equipment. I will say that as a fairly new DC resident, I've only been here for 6 months. I am not completely up to speed with everything that's in play here. But I would suggest that you take some time to find out, if you can, the amount of water that's going to be consumed in those data centers. It's really hard for me to kind of opine in a 1-minute spiel that this is definitely going to make a huge difference. But if you get a guesstimate of the amount of water that's being used and where they're planning to draw that water from, I think that would definitely help your argument.
Can I ask a question? What's a data center? Did I miss that? What is is it a computing thing?
It's a computing center. Liz, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you talking about a bit mining Like
are you talking
a
cryptocurrency?
Bitcoin?
I'm talking about data centers like making Prince William look like Loudon, like ginormous, like acres and acres of servers that we can tax companies for using.
Yeah. So companies like Amazon and other organizations and Bitcoin miners do use these centers as like kind of the source of their computing power, because the computer servers have to live somewhere. Yeah. And no one wants them because they're loud, noisy, cause lots of pollution, and
they use an enormous amount of energy. Yeah. How do they use water? How can you explain that? That's what I'm puzzled about.
Sure. So if you think about it, all of these machines running at the same time produce a lot of heat, right? Mm-hmm. And so you need to keep the machines cool to have them running efficiently. When you're running your laptop, like a regular solid state laptop, you use a fan, it's air cooled.
Yeah, that's like what I got.
With these centers, they're so large and everything's packed together so tightly that you actually have to have a water cooled system. Oh. So that's where all the water is going towards.
Wow.
It's actually very similar to the way that we produce electricity here and throughout most of the world. If you have a thermal generating station, so something that uses coal, oil, natural gas to turn a turbine or make steam to turn a turbine, you need to have water to cool everything back down so the water can recirculate through the system and go through the process of making the steam over and over again. And that is a lot of water as well. It means that thermal energy is actually the largest withdrawer of water in the United States, followed closely by agriculture.
And everything that has been, that's why when I teach this to my students, it's funny, Doc. We talk about energy production, and I say if it spins the stupid thing, it's going to produce electricity. That's the turbine, right?
Yep.
And even nuclear, right? Nuclear power still needs to cool everything down with water as well.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Nuclear is a little odd because it uses what's known as a closed cooling system. So you're recycling the cooling water over and over again, as opposed to what's known as a once through system, where you take lots of water in at the intake, you cool everything down, and then you spit out lots of water at a slightly higher temperature because conservation of energy. Yeah. So it's better from a water withdrawal standpoint. It does mean that there's more evaporation into the air. So if you look at the prototypical picture of a nuclear power station, you'll see the enormous cooling tower with all of that white stuff coming out of the chimney. That's not like radioactive gas. That's just water vapor. Lots and lots of water vapor.
You know, I'm glad we're just mentioning this, that there's a lot of, and I'm not knocking it entirely, but there's a lot of spaces on Twitter, like these audio chat rooms about cryptocurrency. And that's definitely one of the dirty secrets about cryptocurrency is it uses like an enormous amount of energy. And now I guess water, I didn't know that. So, yeah. Okay. Well, Liz, thanks for bringing that up. I'm glad I learned something, and that's kind of not great in the future if it's using all that water. Over to Dr. Nancy.
Hi, Jason. Hi, Dr. Williams. Hey, one of the questions you talked a little bit about the urban environment and the impervious surfaces and, you know, the big dig projects. I get that in the urban environment, but does the Academy have any positions, or have they looked at anything with wildland fire and the impact on the water quality and the water around those areas, both in the burn area analysis, in the afterburn areas, as well as the runoff from the fire retardants during the firefighting?
They have actually a little bit. This isn't my area of expertise necessarily, so take everything I say with a pinch of salt. But I know that there have been papers written about downstream water quality, especially from erosion. Because if you think about it, one of the things that these wildfires do is they wipe out wide tracts of vegetation, which is essentially all that's holding these steep slopes in place. And so when you kill off all of those trees and all of those roots that are holding the soil in place, it just makes your whole slope much more fragile to landslides and to low water quality when all that dirt ends up in your stream. So I know that there are a couple of studies on that. I can go hunt down the authors and post them on my Twitter when I find them.
I didn't mean to make work for you. That I just was curious what you knew about it.
Yeah, no, that's the most direct impact I can think. Obviously, there's also some impact from just like the smoke. Obviously, like I said, everything is ultimately connected. So all the particulates and all of the chemicals that go into our air from wildfires or from our car exhaust streams, for example, do end up in our water again. In fact, one of the largest, we were talking about nitrates, one of the largest contributors to nitrates and nitrate runoff from cities is actually car exhaust streams, because it basically becomes nitrous acid. You have like nitrous oxides from your car that become like nitrous acids when they mix with water vapor in the air, and then it ends up in your rivers, and that becomes nitrates, a source of nitrates. So yeah, the aerosols from those wildfires do eventually end up in streams, but I don't know how much that drives that degradation of water quality after the fact. I think it's mostly the suspended sediments from soil erosion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know the March issue of the AAAS journal was talking about fires in the stratospheric chemistry, but I was thinking more of it when you were talking about from the water aspect of it, but very interesting. Good job.
Thank you.
Good work.
Thank you.
That's so interesting, Dr. Nancy. I talked about, I think like 5 weeks ago, I forget if it was from AAAS, but I talked about the aerosols from the car exhaust in cities mixing with the particulates from wildfires. And it makes like this nasty cocktail of like weirdo acids and other kind of organic stuff that's terrible for water quality. So like the wildfire smoke wafts into a city and has a party with the chemicals that are being produced by our vehicles, and it's just even worse. Again, I don't know the specifics of it because I just talked about it on the podcast briefly, but that's so fascinating that you brought that up, Dr. Nancy. Thank you. Oh, there was something else I was going to mention, and now it flew out of my head that was related to what you both were talking about. Oh yeah, that was one of the things the engineers and the scientists who were looking at the horrific flooding in BC were saying was the precipitating factor was the horrific wildfires the season before. And Chris and I, if you follow our account, folks, you might remember we drove through that one of those fires. Like it was absolutely bananas. And then the next time there was a lot of rain, all of the vegetation wasn't there, and there were some slides and just flooding to beat heck. So, wow, it's all connected, as you said. Hey,
yeah.
Are there anybody else in the audience would like to ask a question of our expert? Go ahead and take the mic. We've got a few minutes left. If you have anything you'd like to ask about water quality, water science.
I'm curious about fracking and or like pumping water into the ground that we do in our oil industry. So we are actually depleting our water supply by doing that. Do you know anything about that?
Any specific question related to that, or just fracking in general?
Just maybe in general, and I guess the dangers of that, like things I can pass on to my students, because we talk about fresh and saltwater systems, and they are stunned about the actual limited amount of water. When they turn on their tap, they, like Jason said, that they get water, but they don't realize the finite or the small amount of it. And they're like, whoa, that was mind blowing for them. Right. And so like there's things that we do that limit our access to that fresh water.
Right. Like, so fracking is a little complicated, partly because of patent issues. A lot of the chemicals that are used in fracking. So I guess I should take a step back and talk about why we use water in fracking in the first place. So the whole idea of fracking is that you want to get at these little particles or these little pockets of natural gas in something like fractured shale that you wouldn't be able to normally pump out using normal natural gas extraction methods. Well, one way of doing that is you get water into the ground with something like sand, or I've heard that they sometimes use coffee grounds in some of the admixtures. You use that to prop open the little pores, and you use the water and lubricants that are mixed in with the water to force out that gas through like Aristotle's principle, basically. If you pump something into a void, a volume space, something else has to come out. And so that's kind of why it's done that way. It's also known as horizontal drilling because a lot of these cracks tend to extend horizontally rather than deep underground. One of the issues is, like I said, because of patent law, a lot of the chemicals that are used in those lubricants, in those solutions that are mixed in with the water, are often not completely known to the general public. And so it's difficult to say exactly what their impact on the environment will be because of that. When you pump some of that water into the ground, obviously you can't account for all of it. Some of it is lost to the system through groundwater. More importantly, you also end up forcing those little pockets of natural gas in alternative directions. So some of you might have seen videos on YouTube or things like that of like people literally being able to light their kitchen taps on fire. That was an issue in parts of Oklahoma for reasons associated with fracking, although it's never been definitively proven that the two were actually related. There was a lot of correlation going on there that makes people think that what was happening was the natural gas being forced into groundwater in adjacent aquifers and then being pumped to the surface and through people's private wells, essentially. So it's very difficult to tell what's happening below the ground surface. And I'm not a fracking expert either by any means, but it's a complicated issue. And honestly, I'm not the hugest fan of natural gas anyway. So,
Hey, Chris, you can talk to me. Remember, I worked in the oil patch, and that's what blew up on us was frack oil.
Yeah. I'm just wondering about our coal bed methane that we have here on the farm and our water supply.
Well, I'll try lighting our taps on fire and see what happens, Chris.
Okay. Please don't.
Okay, great question, Chris. We got time for one more, and that's Dr. M. Hi, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for having me. Hi, Dr. William.
Hi.
My question is the water situation in Flint. I'm not aware if that was an incidental finding of the lead in that water, but what I'm wondering if I have a feeling that no one's checking residential water for things of that sort. Generally speaking, or maybe they are. Maybe you could tell me if they are. But I'm wondering if it could be the case that in a lot of other areas that there is either an identical or similar situation, but that no one has specifically tested for it, and so we just wouldn't know about it. Thank you.
That's a really great question, and it's got a couple of things I'd like to unpack. Firstly, Flint is not an isolated issue. Unfortunately, we found lead in drinking water in Chicago, kind of my home neck of the woods. We found it in Detroit. We found it in a lot of major cities. And again, I'm going to sound like I'm on repeat, but it's in a lot of those same areas: low-income minority population. A lot of school drinking fountains have had their pipes contaminated or their water contaminated with lead from pipes inside the school. A lot of Chicago's park drinking fountains at one point had lead service lines leading up to them that were contaminating the water coming out of the taps. The problem with lead specifically is you can't test at the source for it. You have to test at the tap. And if you imagine like a city like Chicago with millions of people, millions of households, that's a really difficult thing to do, right? The other issue besides that is that under the current rules, the Safe Drinking Water Act has basically two levels of goals or standards, I should say, for drinking water protection. One of them is called a maximum contaminant level goal. So this is the gold standard for human health. This is what we should be doing. And the next tier, the what we call the actionable tier, or when people actually have to notify people that they have a problem so that they can fix it, is what's known as a maximum contaminant level, or an MCL. The maximum contaminant goal level for lead is 0 parts per billion. Multiple pediatricians have said that no amount of lead in drinking water is safe for a child to consume, period. The MCL for lead in drinking water in the United States is 15 parts per billion. So again, that's the level at which people need to be notified that there is a problem in their system, let alone having it like caught and treated before it does damage. So as you can imagine, that disconnected between the MCLG and the MCL is a huge public policy issue that we're still fighting over today. And that's partly because of that issue of you have to go and test every single tap. So people who are doing the testing need to be trained in how to do the testing. There's a certain amount of time you need to let the tap run, for example, so that you're not collecting the first flush of water coming out of the tap, so you can appropriately test it. And obviously it changes over time. Flint's water supply wasn't an issue until they switched to water from the Flint River and forgot to add anti-corrosion chemicals to the water because there was a change in pH that disrupted the internal lining of those lead pipes. So it's a very complex issue. It's something that policymakers are trying to tackle because they understand that it's a ticking time bomb for a lot of American cities. And lots of cities across the country, DC included, are trying to take steps on their own to fix the problem themselves the only way that we can, ultimately, which is taking out those lead pipes in the first place.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great question, Dr. M. I feel like history is kind of repeating itself. Wasn't this the problem with the ancient Greeks or Romans? Didn't they use lead pipe for their plumbings and kind of poisoned some of their populace too?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, lead is a wonderful substance in a lot of ways. It's very pliable. It doesn't erode away over time. It's very durable, which is why we use so much of it in all of our plumbing. And then we realized that it was slowly killing us. Yeah. So we have all of these pipes buried in cities all over the country. And part of the problem is when you rip out part of the system, you actually make it worse for the rest of the system that you're leaving in because you disrupt the chemistry of the remaining pipes and you re-release those lead ions into the drinking water, whereas they might have been more stably bound to the scale on the inside of the pipe if you hadn't taken it out earlier on the system.
So if you take out one bit of it, the whole lot's got to go, and that's like just wicked expensive.
Exactly.
Oof. What a problem. It is the, like, I know in new builds in Canada, for example, it's all like all of the pipe is like plastic. Like it's
yes.
So
absolutely.
I guess we'll find out in like 100 years if that's slowly killing us too. So
yeah, I mean, that's always the problem with new technology, right? Yeah. There's always a little bit of there's always the hidden agenda that you don't realize is there until it's too late. But we'll see.
Well, Doc, we're at the end of our science chat today. Thanks so much for being our guest tonight. It's been absolutely fascinating. Do any of our speakers still up have any other questions or comments before we shut down?
This is Nancy, Jason, and I just wanted to congratulate Dr. William on what a great example you are to women in STEM, and picking the engineering field is always challenging, and you've done a great job with it, and you're a great role model, and I wish you a ton of success going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Nancy. I appreciate it.
It's not every day we get a water engineer. So, Dr. William, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. I've learned so much. Like, I've learned so much from this space. This has been like personally from me to you. Thank you so much for being a guest. And I know our audience has also learned so much too. If you make sure you give Dr. Make sure you give Dr. William a follow if you're in the space today. Is there anything coming up in the future you want to talk to us about, Doc, that you got on the go, or?
In the process, and I will be posting about this, so keep your eyes peeled. I mentioned that virtual concert will be coming up soon, so I will be posting on my Twitter about that as we move towards it. It'll be coming up in June. So I'm very excited about that.
All right. We will keep our eyes out for that. Okay, we'll do our wrap up. Thanks so much to our guest tonight, Dr. William, who's the water engineer, a real-life waterbender, like the airbender and earthbenders from Avatar, for any of the anime fans out there. Nobody's laughing about that joke. Okay, so that fell flat. Thanks so much for being our guest to talk about... Oh, now we're laughing. Now we're laughing at my bad joke. I so appreciate you coming on to be our guest tonight. Also, thanks so much to our speakers who came up to ask really insightful questions tonight. I think we've all learned so much. If you like Science Chat, check out Pet Chat. That's our open mic, wholesome space on Saturday. Chris and I talk about Bunsen and Beaker. We have a game. We have a sponsor that gives a prize. It's a whole lot of fun. Next week on Science Chat, so that's Tuesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, we have Dr. Lacey Brock, who is a astrophysicist that studies stuff in outer space. She's got a really big TikTok account, so I'm excited that she's talking to us on our show on Twitter here. Chris, do you have anything else to add before we go?
No, just thank you everyone for coming. This was really refreshing to learn about water, a precious resource, and inequity with that, and how we can move forward if we're all thinking that we want to work together and raise awareness to protect this resource and take what we've learned back to our municipalities and say, hey, this is really important. We need to focus on this issue, and because we only have one planet, I mean, really, and we need to take care of it, and we need to take care of our water. So thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
And as you said, it's all connected. So I think that's a good message to kind of end with. All of the water is connected. All right, take care of everybody. Space ending in 3, 2, 1, 0. Thanks again, Doc. Take care.
Thank you.